Hello, and welcome to today's webcast brought to you by LEDs Magazine. I'm Editor-in-Chief Maury Wright, and it's my pleasure to host today's presentation, the case study, Smart Building Strategy with Power over Ethernet Lighting. Our presenters today will be Dwight Stewart, founder and CTO of Igor, and Eric Madsen, Senior Vice President of PineBridge. We'll get started in just a second here. Let me just make a few announcements and cover some logistics. The presentation is intended to be live and interactive. You can ask a question at any time by clicking on the Ask a Question button there in your presentation window. No need to wait until we actually get to a Q&A session. Just type it in as it occurs to you. And I'd like to thank Igor for making the presentation possible today. For your convenience, the presentation will be available on demand within 24 hours of the live event. To all registrants, we will send an email message with a direct link to that archive, and you can always access all of our webcasts from our homepage as well. We are making a copy of these slides available to you today in PDF form. There is an area on the lower left of your console that's labeled Event Resources. Just go click there, and you should find a drop-down with the PDF. And I would remind you that you can view our webcast on PCs with browsers, of course, but also on mobile devices. In terms of our presentation today, is something I'm really looking forward to. We had a lot of coverage of power over Ethernet, starting a couple of years ago, and maybe there was a little bit of lull. I think it was just people going and after that initial surge of information about it, going and making the stuff work and learning about it in real applications. And so that's really going to be good for us to hear some details of a major case study today and learn a little bit about how it is performing in real time. So, as I mentioned, we have two speakers today. Dwight Stewart, CTO and co-founder of Igor, a company that's been focused on PoE and central management systems for buildings. He has 15 years of experience as a technology entrepreneur. And Eric Madsen is a Senior Vice President of Information Technology at PineBridge, who is an asset management company. Eric's a network engineer with very deep experience in cybersecurity and infrastructure. So I think Dwight's going to lead us off. Welcome, Dwight. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Maury. Appreciate it. And really excited to have the opportunity to speak to everyone here. Thank you for tuning in and your interest in power over Ethernet and how it's applied to lighting, and we're going to talk about other things as well. It's really exciting. This particular project is really a game changer, and I really appreciate Eric being on the call to talk. So it's not just about, from my perspective, but being able to get all perspectives and really better understand the benefits the user experiences as well. So just to talk a little bit about my background, and then we'll talk also about, and then I'll let Eric speak a little bit about his background. Mine, I have started a few different companies previous to this one. Right out of college, I started my last company, which integrated to about 30 different building automation protocols and brought them up to a central repository that helped reduce energy consumption by 40 to 50% for buildings. And we deployed this at the U.S. Capitol complex, everything but the White House, major universities like Harvard, Duke, Yale, Columbia, and also a variety of large commercial sites. The 30 largest skyscrapers in San Francisco, for instance, we helped reduce energy by an entire power plant worth, especially during peak times, which was critical because we did that during the California brownout issues in the mid-2000s. So really, Igor was born out of a lot of frustration that I saw when dealing with control systems, and a lot of opportunity that I saw could be opened up by taking a different approach. Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm Eric Madsen. I'm a network engineer by trade. That's how I started off in the industry probably about 33 years ago. And then, headed on to the project management track still technical. And now into cybersecurity, it says I'm SVP and Cisco. It should say CISO, head of infrastructure. So basically, I manage both the infrastructure and the cybersecurity for PineBridge Investments.
Thank you, Eric. And so talking a little bit about the background of Igor. Igor, once again, was founded on some frustration that I saw within the industry as it has been. And one of the interesting stats is, back in 2003 when I started my last company, about 5% of buildings use some sort of smarts, some advanced controls. And fast forward to today, and that statistic really hasn't changed. It's still 5%. And that's in itself staggering, right? Because what that means is that there's just not enough value to really encourage and motivate people to make smarts part of their building. And what that also means is, that 5% really has no choice but to incorporate some level of advanced controls because the buildings are just so big, or other reasons that just really require them to incorporate smarts. So how do we get people to start wanting to incorporate smarts? And that's by going beyond just thinking about the building functions. And when we think about what can IoT and smarts do for devices within buildings, and you think about it for smart homes, which is really starting to take off, it's all about convenience and security and all of those other benefits and the functions such as lighting or motion control and things like that. Those are just a means to an end. And so that's where Igor really unlocks this full potential. It's a platform that not only focuses on these functions, because that's kind of the necessary foundation, and that's what we've been talking about for years, but now we've moved to this new world of solutions that are providing business outcomes. And so if you imagine, in different contexts, you have these different needs and different business outcomes that you're seeking. So in commercial buildings, for instance, imagine that you walk in to your building and you want to go to your office. When you first walk in, if the security system could be aware that who you are and be able to provide a profile to the security guard, and so that they know who you are without having to show a pass. And that when you walk past that security entrance, that now you can get a path of lighting to wherever it is that you typically go, because it knows and personalizes to you. And then once you get to your desk, that it's able to tailor that experience, whether it's heating and lighting and other attributes of your workspace, to be more accommodating to who you are and what you prefer. And that has a number of benefits for focusing on comfort, which is going to improve employee retention, and it's going to improve productivity because people are less distracted by, hey, am I really comfortable? Now you're able to just get down to business. And then if you're able to easily find places to go, such as, hey, where's an open conference room and so forth. So those are the problems that we're focused on solving. The functions, such as getting sensors and data and control to different devices, is a key aspect to, if you only have a brain but without a body, you really can't, actuate, you can't do things in the real world, right? So you have to have both. And so we've spent a lot of time constructing our platform so that we can extend ourselves with our intelligence into the physical world and provide those kind of outcomes. So, Eric, you want to talk a little bit about PineBridge?
Sure, absolutely. Let's go to that slide. So PineBridge is a mid-range global asset manager. We have about $100 billion in assets under management, which is actually not considered, to be, we're not a huge asset manager. It's a little different from a hedge fund in that we don't go for what they call alpha. We're sort of a more, I guess our trading strategy is such that it's a little safer than being with a hedge fund. We incorporate several different investment disciplines in our investment strategy. We have about 720 users, again, globally across 28 offices. And I mean, we have an office in pretty much every major city, in all the major countries globally. And it's a busy environment. It's a challenge for sure. You can imagine we at least in my role of running infrastructure and cybersecurity, we have compliance regulations that we have to follow in several different countries, and then we've got the whole infrastructure side of things, and it's certainly a challenge, but it's a lot of fun.
Excellent. So, with the let's talk about a little bit more of the problem. I talked about it a little bit before in my frustrations with my last company, but it's really multidimensional, and there's a lot of problems to solve in order that exist in the world today with typical systems. That if one of them continues, then it really creates an impediment and enough friction that it's difficult to move to a smart building. And so it really takes a radical new approach. And that's really why, over time, 5% has remained that number for buildings using advanced control systems has kind of persisted for a couple decades and arguably longer. So one of the problems is that these systems are typically expensive. So, the status quo is expensive with labor, as well as just the technology is proprietary. Typically, without data, it's hard to optimize these systems. So you have waste when it comes to either in maintenance or because a lot of the parts will fail on a regular basis, or there's waste in energy usage. So trying to break down those barriers, and then a lot of, even in the controls world, a lot of it is proprietary. Now that's expensive because there's only a certain number of people that can even maintain it. And then incompatible, well, that's multifaceted as well. Incompatible because it's proprietary a lot of times, and that makes it, well, there's only one company that can service you, and you're very limited to what kind of devices you can use, only devices that are manufactured by that one company. And then also, it's incompatible from a market perspective globally. So, for instance, if you're designing a light or other device in the United States, you're going to use the electrical standards in the United States, which means that, and you have to get all the certifications and things for the United States. So it makes it much more difficult to roll out globally. So you're very limited as to what your total addressable market is. And then when it comes to just overall limited as to the functionality of the systems, or typically because of if they are using data, it's only data through a certain kind of protocol such as BACnet, for instance, that can only transport certain kinds of data. So it's very limited as to what it can do. And typically each individual device in a building does a very specific set of things, but doesn't go beyond that. You have silos of, an end-to-end wiring of security, end-to-end wiring for lighting, end-to-end wiring for each one of these individual systems. So it's also very inefficient as to its design and how it can be utilized, not just from day one, but also how can this infrastructure be utilized and extended so that you can iterate over time and be able to employ, as new devices are coming out, which they come out all the time, and smart buildings are really accelerating. Now, how can you keep yourself in a position to expand into trying out and deploying new technologies? So the basics of PoE allow for really tearing down those barriers. And what PoE does on the sense of, it's one cable that can deliver multiple protocols simultaneously and using high security standards. There's a wide array of IT personnel that it's a whole ecosystem of the IT industry that is already established. It's something that there are it's more of a value add model where there's a number of different players that all kind of come together and do best of world solutions for their individual pieces. So for instance, Cisco for their switching, and then having individual devices that can exist on the Power over Ethernet infrastructure as well, but all using standards that exist in the industry for protocols and things like that. So you end up with a worldwide standard as well that you can deploy because these protocols and the physical form factors and everything else are worldwide standards. So the applicability and the serviceability and deployability, all of that is something that is very well understood. And if you look at how Power over Ethernet has been transitioning all sorts of other devices over the last 10 years, that it's created this digital transformation that has been very significant for security, for IP cameras, for voice over IP phones. So it's really transformed so many different devices over the last years, and that's only going to increase. And Power over Ethernet lighting is really the next in line. So we talked a little bit about Ethernet cabling, and it's really simple. It's plug and play. It can be installed by low voltage labor. There's a whole industry that already does voice over IP phones and other things, and that industry is well posed to have these conversations with owners, in particular because this technology is offering a means of digital transformation for a business. And when you think about a business's digital strategy, and it's not just limited to how they're interacting with their customers, and really this is an extension of that digital strategy. So if you think about, if you're a retailer and you want to better understand your customers when they first walk in, well, who is this person? Using some means of technology to identify that person and then link that in with a loyalty system and so forth. What better way to just continue to extend that digital strategy for your business into the infrastructure itself? So then we also talked about LED lighting. LED lighting is DC based, so it just makes sense. Power over Ethernet is DC based. Pretty much everything is going DC. If you look at almost any device nowadays has some sort of adapter to go from AC to DC. It really feels like from the waist above, you're in a DC world. The only remaining things that are AC feel like they're vacuum cleaners and other large appliances. But we're really moving to this new world of DC grid, and Power over Ethernet is completely aligned with that. And then Power over Ethernet, because it's since 2003, it has continued to evolve to today, where we're now at the new BT standard, which can provide up to 100 watts of power over the line. Realistically, you get about 80 watts or so at the actual device. And at that point, it really unlocks, with that new standard that just came out last year, that really opens up the number of applications and devices that can exist on Power over Ethernet. So you're not limited in the lighting anymore, because the efficacy or the amount of lumens or light you get per watt continues to improve. And so a typical 2x2 troffer, for instance, would maybe anywhere from 20 watts to 40 watts of power demand. And then you have even high bay lights are now starting to get to the point where they could be on one Ethernet cable, but this technology allows, based on the architecture, you can always have a couple home runs if necessary, if you had a very large light. So it really opens up a lot of opportunities. And also what that means is that in a lot of cases, you're going to have excess power. So with our technology in particular, we can daisy chain nodes one after the next. You can use one home run and really utilize the maximum of every port potential. So that allows for minimizing the number of network switches and the number of home runs that are install and infrastructure costs. So we continue to see this cost reduction that's very significant. And then with Power over Ethernet lighting is everywhere. Every few feet you're going to have a light. So what better item in a building that could ubiquitously become an IoT hub. And so not only from day one, once again, but from at any point in a building's life cycle, you can really transform a building from being this static edifice that is what it is day one to an agile environment which can continue to evolve. And that's important not just because there's new technologies coming out, but also we're all human at the end of the day, and we can design something the best we can, and it takes a lot of effort, and you really get diminishing returns, quite frankly, on the amount of effort you put into anything to guess as to what the best way to design something is, such as a building. But if instead we can take the mentality of, let's do the best we can, but there's always the option to change later, so we're not stuck with what we have, then it really opens up the opportunity to be a little more creative and take, try new things. And that really allows for companies and facilities to try to really innovate. So that this convergence really leads to that opportunity that now we see really taking off with Power over Ethernet lighting as kind of that IoT point of origin within buildings, and just being able to leverage that. So, once again, why do we want to use Power over Ethernet for smart buildings? All these different factors play a large role. First off, it's reliable, and noteworthy is Power over Ethernet lighting, or Power over Ethernet in general. We recognize that there are times when wireless makes sense, and there might be a need for a light switch that's on a glass wall, and you don't want to see any wires. So we do believe that Power over Ethernet, because of its reliability, its robustness, its ability to transport multiple protocols at once, its real-time ability, its high throughput, all of those wonderful things make it a perfect pipeline for a backbone for IoT. So what we've done is, on our latest node, we have USB, and you can connect different transceivers, USB transceivers for different wireless protocols or other types of devices up to our node. And now it becomes that last mile is whatever protocol you want it to be. And so you're not stuck with any particular thing, but there's no better backbone than Power over Ethernet, and not only for communication, but also for power. And so if we look at our flexibility in design, the other critical part, once again, is just like I was talking about for wireless, you really want to use whatever device makes the most sense for the situation. And so we're all about open standards. We're all about being able to bring your own devices and employ them at will, however you want. So we don't focus on hardware at all. And in the case of Highbridge, they had a number of different lights that they wanted to employ. And architects and designers want this wide diversity of options. So how do we enable that? Well, we have a highly configurable, programmable node that allows you to attach to just about any light and then be able to dim and control it, whether it's got multiple channels like white tunable or color. And now you have that control of that fixture, but it's really, really simple. And then we have a couple different form factors as well for the node, so that it could live inside the fixture, it could live remotely from the fixture, and you have a number of different options there. And it really just giving the optionality and creative freedom to the designers. We see, and we're always amazed as to how people choose to use and deploy the technology. We're always learning ourselves based on the project, and the nice thing is to have a technology that's capable of all those different scenarios. Just gives that freedom to the installers and the designers. And then next is The lights, once again, if we were just doing lighting, there's lots of ways to do lighting. There's other protocols that are highly tuned that are just for lighting, and anything that is highly tuned and optimized for one task is typically going to be the cheapest option, for instance, right? But cheapest isn't better. It's going to be limited, and in this new era of digital transformation, that is not acceptable. And especially when you think about how, if you're not transforming as a business, that you're going to be left behind, and more there's an acceleration of businesses that are at risk of failure because they're not keeping up. So it's really critical that businesses position themselves for this digital transformation. And the way in which you get there is by having technology that can be more versatile and accommodating to allow you to enter these new types of applications. So once again, we have these building blocks so that you can do the more interesting stuff like autonomous buildings, autonomous business, all these different outcomes and business objectives that you have. So, but the first step is, how can you get these different devices on the network? Well, for us, our node has a number of ways that you can connect devices, whether it's analog inputs. The node itself powers those devices with constant voltage. And so 24 volts, for instance, to power an analog sensor. It can connect up to serial bus devices. So we're working with Somfy and other shade companies to not only power but also control automated window shades, motorized shades. Working with USB sensors and other devices. Lots of different serial bus devices already exist out there. So connecting those devices, powering those devices, and hence the name Igor, is we basically are digitally making these devices come to life, similar to the idea of Frankenstein, bringing things to life. And by doing that, now they're almost like Lego pieces that are available within our software that you can do interesting things with. And that, from that point forward, it's all about just leveraging that interaction and that data. So now we're going to talk and dive into this project specifically. And Eric, do you want to take over?
Absolutely. So let me just get to the right slide here. So we had to move from our existing office at 399 Park, and we were doing a full build out. We went from 1 floor to 3 floors, and we had to make a decision on what we were planning to do with our lighting. That was one of the things that came up. So just a little on PoE. So, PoE isn't really new at PineBridge. We've been using PoE for things like phones, access points, video surveillance cameras, for years. More recently, we started using PoE for things like room schedulers and screen sharing devices. And, my first PoE lighting project was in 2015. So when PineBridge decided last year that they wanted to move this year in 2019, it only made sense that I would push for PoE lighting as the solution for our build-out. We had a very aggressive build-out schedule. It was a 3-floor construction starting in mid-April, and the planned move-in date was was August 23rd. That's an 18-week build-out schedule for 3 floors, which included 2 staircases within the floors, and you'll see pictures of that later. And delaying the move to September wasn't an option. There were a lot of cost savings, related to our moving, which is usually why companies move in the first place. And it's funny, we just moved around the corner, so it wasn't like we moved, a mile away or anything like that. New York City is a pretty small place, but the fact that we were a block and a half away from our old building, made it easy to monitor the construction project. I've done several build-outs in my career, and it always makes me laugh that every company has an aggressive build-out schedule. It needs to happen as soon as possible, which puts a lot of pressure on the IT team as well as the construction team. For those of you that have not had the joy of managing construction projects for your company, you should know that it requires an enormous amount of physical and emotional energy. I had the even greater joy of managing the move, which was just simply exhausting. So, we did all that. Anyway, back to the presentation. So, there are several advantages to PoE lighting that I'm going to run through now. Just going through this slide. Well, PoE lights themselves are similar in cost, and Dwight can confirm this anyway, regardless. But the PoE installation utilizes low voltage data cabling versus the standard high voltage electrical BX type wiring. And using low voltage cabling for lighting means that instead of hiring electrical subcontractors, which tend to be a little more expensive, to install your lighting, you're using the same installers that you would use to install your data cabling. The net effect of this is a lower installation cost. When you start getting into the 90 watt per port equipment, you can start daisy chaining 2 to 3 30 watt lights together to lower your cost even further. And I think Dwight touched on some of that before. The next advantage to PoE lighting is the rebate check. You'll get from your local power company, which for us is Con Ed. We just got our $54,000 rebate check from Con Ed last week, so it's very exciting. And since rebates will vary by power company in each region, you should definitely find out ahead of time what type of rebate program, if any, is available in your area. And if you're going to use the rebate as part of your funding for the PoE installation, you definitely want to have that information to present to your management ahead of time. For PineBridge, it was a great side effect. It didn't sway us or help us in our decision making. We wanted to do PoE, so for us it was a good side effect. And the COE was happy to cash the check that I handed to her. Since it's a rare occurrence that IT. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that is because of getting DLP certification on the Igor system. So Igor was the first Power over Ethernet system to actually get that DLP certification, which that was a big deal.
Yeah, it took a while. I mean, we finished so September 1, we were here, and, I got my check right before Thanksgiving. So it takes a while, but, it does come in the mail eventually. And it's a rare occurrence that IT gets to, which is a cost center, gets to give money back to the finance department. So it's happy to contribute to our bottom line, even if it was just to give back a little money that we already spent during a multi-million-dollar build-out. Con Ed also gives ongoing price breaks to companies that utilize PoE lighting, and I wish I had that information handy, but it's probably changing all the time. You should definitely ask your local power company for details on that as well. It helps make your case for installing PoE lighting. Another great advantage of PoE lighting is the fact that you're plugging the lights into a network switch. So data analytics is an obvious benefit. And Dwight, if you wouldn't mind, you want to go into some of the analytics, because I think you're better equipped to kind of go through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So once you have all these different devices connected and the software then sees them, and from a number of perspectives, that's really valuable. One is that firstly, the software can integrate to things that are already on the network, so you can basically, it unifies all of these devices, whether they're on or traditionally off the network or on the network. And then with that connectivity, we can trend that data over time as to the sensor values or interactions that people have with light switches and whatever it might be, people moving around in the office. And what's that data, then especially the more kinds of data that you have, that can be provided to either third-party systems. So let's say it's a retailer, or if it's an office, or you can send that data to an application that mines and reports on that data to show space utilization, so that you can better optimize your floor layout. If you learn, for instance, that your conference rooms are only occupied about 30%, or if you have certain ones that are only occupied 30% of their capacity, maybe it makes sense, if there's a lack of conference rooms, that you start subdividing those conference rooms, so that because you only use them as smaller conference rooms, so start subdividing them. So there's information that you can get to make better decisions as to your facilities, and then there's using that data and analyzing it more in real time also provides interesting benefit, where you can start personalizing experiences, if you see a certain person in a certain area, that they have certain preferences. And this gets all the way to more of like the autonomous building, where it starts behaving and adjusting things based on people's preferences. And everyone's different, and if, when possible, that being able to create personalized experiences can really make a difference, once again, so people aren't distracted by being uncomfortable or feeling like, in certain cases they might feel unsafe, or if they're one person in a big office and they're there late, or whatever the case might be. So it's using the analytics in either retrospectively or in real time has some real benefits, and those are provided either locally or in the cloud, where you can get that data and send it to other systems. And one of the other things is, like our philosophy in general is, use what's best out there. So use the best devices and connect them up to the platform. Use the best apps and data analytics. And a lot of companies already have things established. So you might be using Microsoft Power BI, for instance. And so just, for your data that you use for, and you're already feeding data for your financials and other things, let's say, to Microsoft Power BI. So by feeding this data to it as well, you have one tool that can see all these different kinds of data, and you're not just analyzing data in a vacuum, but rather you're analyzing this data alongside other types of data coming from other places, and that's where you start seeing interesting causal type scenarios and correlations with other aspects of your business, which you never may have realized otherwise. So having an open platform that allows you to send data to systems that you already have in place for analytics is really key.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I mean,
hand the baton to you.
Sorry?
I said I hand the baton to you, Eric.
Absolutely. And then the last couple of points, is maintenance is also more cost effective. You don't have to hire an electrician for $1,000 every time there's an issue with a light or a fixture. Just remember, PoE lighting is low voltage, so you could, if you ever did it with a 9-volt battery, you could probably put your tongue right up against that wire and it won't electrocute you. No, just kidding. Your IT department can replace lights or a node that drives the lighting easily. And since LED lights are used in PoE lighting, they last many times longer than fluorescent or incandescent lights. So you're not going to need to replace lights that often anyway. In our previous space, we spent several $1,000s each year for, I don't know what it's officially called, but it's light bulb maintenance. Somebody would come each month. They would look at all the lights, and depending on the fixture, they may have to cut the electricity to the fixture and then replace the light. And it adds up. So that maintenance is no longer. And then the last thing, and it's the points you made, and everyone knows LED lights, which are what's used in PoE lighting, use a half to a third as much electricity. So you can expect your electric bill to go down significantly. And I'm going to start tracking that now. Now that everything's settled here, and I will present my management with proof that we are spending less each month with electricity. So the challenge. So this is a lot of fun. So during the early design and architectural phase of the project, I expressed my desire to install a PoE lighting system. It was met with a significant amount of resistance from the construction team because the project manager that we hired, the architect, the electrical engineers, the general contractor, and then later on the electricians and the low voltage installers had never done a PoE installation. So not one part of our team had done this. And I said, well, we should probably get people that have done it, but because everything, things are the economy is doing very well right now, and getting people in New York City to do things quickly is not that easy. So we were limited in the contractors that we were able to bring on to do the job. And I mean, even though there is not, in terms of design, there's not a huge difference between standard lighting and design and a PoE design. The lights go in the same place. It's what's behind them that change, and even that's not what I would consider to be a significant change. I incorrectly assumed that between my first experience with PoE in 2015 and now in 2019 that many more people were doing PoE lighting. I mean, there are. I mean, in terms of absolute numbers, definitely. But it's caught on a lot, but it's not where it's going to be in 3, 5, 7 years. I think within, and I'm sure Dwight and Igor have real stats on this. I have to imagine that within 7, 8 years, everyone's going to be doing PoE lighting. So the first thing I had to do was go to my chief operations officer, who was the main sponsor for the move, and I had to sell him on the idea, which is everything in this slide deck, why it's good, why we should do it. He came from our office in London, and in London, it's basically a requirement that LED lighting must be used. So LED lighting is the heart of PoE, and so it wasn't that hard to sell. The thing that made it a little more difficult is we had an aggressive build-out schedule, and that certainly became a challenge with the rest of the team. Once I had the backing of this chief operations officer, I made it clear to the construction team that we were going to be doing the installation. This entailed educating and convincing a group of old school people who I just met that never installed PoE lighting the advantages of PoE lighting technology. So not easy. Even saying it's a challenge is an understatement. There was a lot of conversations. I had to divide and conquer, by starting with the project manager firm, because they ran the project. The general contractor and every subcontractor fell under their responsibility. They were excited about the prospect of doing the PoE installation because they know it's getting popular. But at the same time, you need an 18-week schedule to build out 3 floors with 2 staircases. It's definitely a challenge, and they had their reservations. What helped was that I told them I'd be sure to shield them from senior management, backlash, if the schedule slipped. I mean, between us, I knew it wouldn't slip, but I made that promise because we had to get them on board. I also explained that doing the project would make them more desirable to make all these contractors more desirable to future clients that wanted to do PoE implementations. And I'll actually come back to that point after. I also promised to let the installers bring prospective clients to our space to showcase their PoE implementation. And all of that gave them the confidence they needed to proceed with the installation. So I think, it was helpful to kind of go through this exercise with them. And the next critical piece of the PoE puzzle was bringing the right supplier in for the PoE technology. It happened to be the easiest part since, Igor are the best player in the space. They have the most experience, the best track record, and they're a leader in this space. And if you do your research on the internet, which is kind of where I started, Igor kept coming up. And then as I kind of went deeper, it was very clear that they were the company to use. I brought them in early in the project so they could kind of shepherd the team through the PoE part of the build-out. The piece of advice I'd give here, more on the construction and kind of going against, what people want to do on the construction team is to be collaborative, with the team and the installers in these situations. Nobody likes a dictator. You need to perform a construction project as a team. Explain the benefits that make everyone, win in a situation like this. Fast forwarding to today, there have been several walkthroughs. The designers and the installers have won several PoE jobs as a result of doing our PoE installation. And I even to this day, I have great relationships with all the people on the team. So in the end, after all the hard work and convincing people to do things, it ended up working out for the best. So I'll start this part of the discussion or this slide with the reason that we went with 90 watts. And again, Dwight's covered a lot of this, so this may be redundant. Going with 90 watts meant that we would have fewer low voltage runs because we'd be able to daisy chain 90 watts worth of lights versus the old standard of 60 watts, which is what I did in 2015, and a lot of companies probably did around that time as well. Daisy chaining lowers the build-out cost, increases port density, and it also simplifies the design. So the next step and the bigger part was choosing the 90-watt provider, PoE provider. And what I mean is who's going to power this thing. So we first designed the PoE lighting. We plan on using a product from a company called Microsemi. They are still very popular in the space. Their product's called Midspan. It provided 90 watts per port, and they were one of the first companies to offer 90 watts per port, which again was a major driver for me. The product looks like a switch, but it's actually considered a power injector because it has a port that provides power injection, and then a second port that is associated with that port that let you connect the network switch for the data portion of the analytics part of it. So a 24-port Midspan actually has 48 ports. And I wish I had pictures of this because it would be easier visually. But if you can imagine the setup, you have an Ethernet patch cord that goes from your patch panel to the Midspan port, port 1. And then port 1A is a 1-foot cable that goes from that port to a network switch like a 2960. And because the power is being provided by the Midspan, the Cisco switch doesn't need to be a PoE switch because remember the Midspan is providing the power. So we would have needed about 32 Midspans plus 16 48-port switches. And each 48-port switch would have a Midspan above it and a Midspan below it with that 1U cable. And the reason I wanted a 1U Cisco switch versus a chassis was that a 1-foot Ethernet cord looks a lot nicer than running a bunch of cables around wire managers to a chassis switch. If you're having a hard time imagining the scenario, you can see this was less than an ideal setup for me. We would have needed 1,000 patch cords for 500 PoE lights. So I just decided to look for other solutions. Didn't knock them out initially, but it was definitely something that I was questioning at the time. The next product we found was from a company called Transition Networks. They had a network switch capable of 90 watts, and what simplified it is it was a network-based port. So we're back down to 500 patch cords, one for each light, each lighting run, and it looked like the solution we were going to use because my preferred vendor, which was Cisco, didn't have a 90-watt solution, back earlier in the year, February, March. You either had a 12-port 90-watt solution or a 24-port solution, but you had to keep to a power budget, which didn't give you 24 ports at 90 watts each. And I wanted a 48-port solution. I mean, it seemed simple to me, but I guess it wasn't as simple at the time. So one day in June, which is about 10 weeks before I move in, I received a call from my Cisco rep, and he offered me the opportunity to use a new product they were releasing that was exactly what I wanted. 48-port line card that put out 90 watts on each port. It was a chassis-based solution that uses their 9400 platform. And since I already had I had 4 9410 switches for my existing data network, it made sense to go with their 9407 chassis and switches for switch line cards for their PoE installation. And it was more efficient power-wise and a smaller footprint than the transition of the Midspan product. In the timeline of a construction project, though, this is definitely last minute. 10 weeks is kind of like it's happening tomorrow. And while it didn't impact the construction schedule, it made sense. And I decided to move forward with the solution. And I do have some information here on Cisco's 90-watt products, and some people may ask, and I'm just going to read it. It's Catalyst 9400 series is the next generation of the industry's most widely deployed enterprise switching platform. It was recognized as CRN 2017 and 18 Network Product of the Year. And, we do own the 9400, so I can attest to that. The modular access switches are built for security, IoT, and cloud, and they deliver state-of-the-art, high availability, support up to 9 terabytes, and provide the latest in 90-watt UPoE Plus, and form one of the building blocks for SD Access, Cisco's leading enterprise architecture. So I wanted to give you that information in case that was pertinent.
And also something to note is that this was the very first install of the Cisco 90-watt product anywhere in the entire world. So this site is the first time that Cisco's 90-watt solution was deployed, and it was really, really exciting because with our node, we're the only 90-watt capable node for Power over Ethernet available. And so to finally to have that opportunity to work, we have this great relationship with Cisco, and to then be able to work very closely on making sure that this project is a success and making everything work together it's just been fantastic. So it's really appreciate, Eric, you being the first to implement that 90-watt solution, and I think now you've got something that's really has lasting power and is a heck of a showpiece.
Yeah, and there are a lot of security features that I'm not really taking advantage of right now. But if you do decide to speak to Cisco, and I can certainly help anyone that wants to get in touch with Cisco that doesn't have a rep right now. There are a lot of security features and a lot of other features that if you're interested in using, Cisco would love to talk to anybody about it. I've used Cisco my whole career. Definitely a huge Cisco fan. They obviously are the leader in the space for sure. And I mean, PoE lighting is sort of a natural progression for a company like Cisco. And here are a couple of pictures of the PoE installation. And there are 3 9407 chassis switches. There's only one pictured here. There was a group of patch panels going down to the switch. And each switch has 8 3200 watt power supplies. I saw a question, so I'll try to answer it in this discussion. Behind each one of these PoE racks, we have a 17.4 kilowatt APC, American Power Conversion, power distribution unit. It's definitely, and the 2 racks that we have for PoE use more power than the other 6 racks that we have for our servers. So yes, you use a lot of power. It was, I think it was a 60 amp plug, which is a giant plug. I mean, and I would say the cable for that plug is probably, if you squeezed all your fingers together, it was pretty thick. It's that size, probably an inch around. So it definitely is a lot of power. But just remember, it's powering 500 lights in my space. So yes, you're gonna need that. Now, whether we decided not to put it on our UPS, you may decide to do that. But we have a few other tricks to kind of get power to certain areas. If we completely lose power, but if the building loses power, the fire department is going to kick us out anyway. So I wouldn't get caught up in trying to put 34 kilowatts on a UPS for lighting. And as Dwight said, we were the first customer in the world to use their 90-watt chassis-based product. And given that it was a 1.0 product, I mean, there were surprisingly few issues. Really, it's just Cisco having to tweak a few things. Nothing major, and it's quite stable, so no issues there. The picture on the left shows the beautiful work that was done by our low voltage vendor, and the picture on the right shows the connections to the patch panel with the Cisco switch. I did want to take a moment to let you know that the patching of network cables is something near and dear to my heart. And I need to say that I didn't do the work that you're seeing in the picture on the right. To me, neat patching of network cables is an art. Needless to say, I promise that I will be redoing that work so it looks as nice as the data cables that I did run, which unfortunately is not pictured here. I don't want to brag. It's not about that. It's just that when people walk into your room, if you see a horrible, patch job, even though it doesn't really mean anything technically, it doesn't look good. So this is done. This is done by our vendor, one of our vendors, and it's okay. It's just not, it's not to our standard. And all the cables should be green. They had to substitute a couple of blue cables in. Again, I also use, I have color standards for my cables just because it makes it very easy when you're trying to look in a busy patch field to know that, a purple cable is Wi-Fi, let's say, and a blue cable is a user drop. Green cable is PoE, and so on. So this is a picture I really like to show. So the staircase, which I think all 3 staircases, well, actually it's 2 staircases connecting 3 floors, and this is the view from the 5th floor up to the 7th floor. So that staircases are really expensive. It was probably about $1.5 million just to build a staircase internally in an office versus, let's say, using an elevator. But it was our management wanted it that way, and it does look quite beautiful. I mean, I think it's sort of the centerpiece of the space. And just a couple more. So you can see some of the lights in some of the earlier slides that Dwight showed. Some of the linear lights, the round lights, and I don't know their technical names, but more pictures of our space. We have an open seating space here. open seating plan. We have sit-stand desks. We use ergonomic monitor arms, and above it all are our PoE lights. Just some more pictures. It's just it is a beautiful space, I have to say. I did have an office in the previous space, so I do miss my office. I'm not going to lie, but it did turn out to be a beautiful installation. This is we have 3 coffee stations with soft drinks on each of our floors, PoE lighting above and below, and a really cool coffee machine on the left. So that was really nice. So
Coffee machine is not PoE yet, right?
No, yeah, good point. That is not PoE. It will be one day, I'm sure. I also failed to mention our shades are also on the PoE system, and right now we haven't integrated the shades with the PoE lighting where, if it's super bright, the shades will close. Our building is surrounded by really tall buildings, so the lighting is a challenge. The outside lighting coming into the space is a bit of a challenge for us. So just, and this is, I think there's a lot of questions, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on the last couple of slides. Plus, I think this is more of a review, but it is a half to a third of the electrical consumption that you're probably doing now with non-PoE lighting. Cheaper maintenance costs by having your IT team. I mean, listen, we have enough to do, but still, IT team can replace a light or a PoE node, and it gives you the hooks to add future technology that comes out. You can connect your air to the system as well. I don't know if I touched on that earlier, but depending on the amount of sunlight and the heat, you can actually have the PoE call for PoE system call for more AC or more heat depending on the situation. So you are preparing for that smart building technology. So this is actually a pretty important slide. Pick the right lighting and programming partners. It's so important because they're the one, when people come into the space on day one, if the lights are not working properly, it sort of, even though we know they're going to work well in the end, it detracts from the overall system, from the overall space. You want to find contractors with PoE installation experience. Thanks to me and our project, are the people that worked on our project are now PoE pros. And then don't be only focused on costs. Sometimes spending 5% or 10% more may save you money in the end, depending on what if there's rebates or your ongoing cost. Do a real cost analysis, benefit cost analysis. I think it really helps a lot. And last thing on a construction project, the most important thing is to be on site every day, or as close to every day as you can. Things happen in the field, and if you're not there, a decision is going to be made for you that you may or may not agree with. And I've done enough of these where even if you're on every day, you're not going to be here the whole day, but at least you're here for people to bounce issues and questions off of you. So that's just a construction tip. Anyway, I think that's the end of the presentation. So I think we could probably turn it over to questions.
Okay, we will get a few questions here. We are running a little short of time, but the one question that I see, one thing I see recurring in a number of the questions we have here is questions about basically voltage drop across cable runs, and you can ask that from a number of ways. I mean, we've heard that one of the advantages of PoE is that it's a DC grid and you do power conversion in one spot, and that's more efficient than doing power conversion in every fixture. But other people will say, well, you lose some of that in the long runs of this DC cable. Other people here have asked, how do you explain the choice of what gauge wiring you're using, and how do you accommodate for voltage drop? Can you guys, and especially when daisy chaining comes into the situation, can you briefly kind of address the whole topic of voltage drop on these cables and how that impacts a reliable installation?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's lots of different aspects to that. One is choosing the Ethernet gauge wire that is most suitable for your application. So we would always recommend that using 23 gauge cable rather than 24 gauge, which 24 gauge is thinner. And then there are options out there for 22 gauge as well. And so based on the cable run length, Ethernet and power over Ethernet can go about a football field in distance. So if you're running it, in that kind of distance, which is very rare, by the way, usually have a data closet much closer than that. But in those kind of cable runs, then you may want to opt for using that really heavy gauge 22 gauge. But the majority of your runs, you're not going to have that kind of issue. You're going to be running, let's say 100 feet or maybe 150 feet, maybe 200 feet, or much less. And so typically, you just choose the 23 gauge is going to be fine for you. You're going to see, just a couple watts worth of loss probably. So it's very negligible. The other side of it, which kind of negates some of that loss, is that because you're consolidating that AC to DC switching at a really robust power supply like a Cisco switch, it's going to be a more efficient power conversion because it's a more value, it's a higher value type power supply versus if you put, what's typical is you have a whole bunch of AC-DC conversions happening in each individual fixture with really cheap supplies. And so they're not only going to be typically less efficient, but also they are going to fail after, let's say, 5 years or so. And even though LEDs last a long time, you have to go around replacing those things. And so by having a more robust supply that's consolidated, it's easier to access because it's, right there at your level. You don't have to get up in the ceiling. You don't have to have all that maintenance of going around and trying to figure out which ones have failed. And then that power conversion kind of negates the cabling loss. So it's typically not an impediment at all. And so it's, we've had Department of Energy has also done a study on this, as well as a couple other industry leaders. So I can, for those that are interested, I can follow up on that.
And one other, this is kind of a consolidated question basing on trying to read through a bunch of questions that came in. But the control scenario with PoE, you're running DC power into the luminaire, but there is still some kind of power conditioning device in the luminaire, I believe. What is the kind of the chain of data passing that ultimately ends up allowing you to dim or turn lights on and off? Because you do need some kind of power control inside the luminaire, right?
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, the node, the power over Ethernet node itself, whether it's in the luminaire or remotely mounted, you might have one node that's connected to numerous luminaires. So however you choose to deploy it, that's where the brains are. So the node is like a little mini computer in a way that it receives Ethernet traffic and processes that, decides what to do. And one of those operations would be to, let's say, dim a light channel. And depending on the node, it would, if it's constant current light channel, then it would vary the milliamp output on that particular LED output, and you'd get your dimming. So it's got a basically just one step, and unless we are connecting to, let's say, a Somfy shade, and then we're communicating to that device via serial data, and that Somfy shade has its own intelligence inside of it, that it processes that serial communication and then decides what to do. Same concept for a USB transceiver or something like that. But for us on the PoE node, it's just one processor that's doing most of that work.
And so the current, the constant current, that comes out of your node, even though it might go to multiple luminaires, it is that lowered current level coming out of your node that is doing the dimming. And if you
That's
power
correct.
it off, there would be no power out of the node to the luminaire.
Correct. Yeah. And so the LED array is directly connected. There's no other driver necessary. It's directly connected to a PoE node. The PoE node has multiple LED constant current outputs in that case. We have different versions of the node, but that way, let's say you have a multi-channel light or you have multiple lights that you want to connect to one node, that each one of those can be individually controlled constant current outputs.
Okay, very
and
good.
It also does deep dimming as well, so it's very granular in its control.
And one other thing you mentioned was the discussion of sometimes you do need other technologies in the system, maybe a wireless technology for a switch or whatever. And you could think about adding that capability behind the Ethernet switch. But do I understand that you're talking about putting USB out in these remote nodes to be able to add support for something like a wireless channel?
Correct. That's exactly what we do. Yeah. So you can just throw an Igor node anywhere that you want to have coverage and connect up a USB transceiver for that wireless protocol, for instance. And it's as easy as that. And all that communication with that wireless protocol bubbles up through our API. And so it's a really powerful aspect of our system.
So I'm afraid we're going to have to end it here because we're well over the top of the hour, and I know we want to be cognizant of our attendees' time, and we do have a ton of questions, and so I will talk with Dwight about other options for getting some of these questions answered for you in the audience. On behalf of LEDs Magazine and Endeavor Business Media, I'd certainly like to thank Dwight and Eric for an excellent presentation. It's certainly an exciting area of technology and a complicated area, but one that has a lot of potential. I'd like to thank Igor again for sponsoring the webcast today. The webcast will be archived within 24 hours and can also be accessed from the homepage, but we'll send all of you in the audience a direct link. And for those of you in the audience, we certainly appreciate you joining us today. I know your time's valuable. We really appreciate it when you spend some of it with us. We look forward to serving you with future webcasts. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.